I'm betting that I can stop this hypothetical story right here, and everyone watching and listening will still know that this is the beginning of a tale about a detective, a private eye, and a case that will soon have him and the blonde entangled in mystery and danger in the shady underworld of a big city. How did we get so familiar with this type of fiction? Well, one reason is the Maltese Falcon by Dashiell Hammett, which is the subject of this year's Scranton Reads project. My name is John McInerney from the University of Scranton, and this is the first of a series of talks about this most famous private eye novel. Right now, we'll concentrate on putting the Maltese Falcon in context by explaining how it fits into the rich history of the detective story. Many students of the form say that Edgar Allan Poe, back in the years 1841 to 1844, first put together the basic elements of the detective story as we know it today. His stories, like Murders in the Rue Morgue and The Purloined Letter, feature an eccentric amateur detective, C. Auguste Dupin, whose genius for detection solves the crimes. The stories offer readers clues by which they could, if they are clever enough, unravel at least part of the puzzle before Dupin does it for them. Poe even has the tales narrated by an admiring, often awed associate. The next great innovator in the field, Arthur Conan Doyle, depended heavily on the precedents Poe set. Doyle also gives us stories built around dazzling ratiocination, or clever reasoning, executed by the most famous deducer of them all, Sherlock Holmes. The Holmes novels and stories, published in England beginning in 1887 and continuing until 1927, present a protagonist who was more fully developed or three-dimensional than Dupin, even though he too is aloof, strange in his habits, and haunted by his own tragically romantic temperament. Still, we can relate to him and believe in him because we follow his adventures through the eyes of Dr. Watson, his comfortably ordinary companion assistant. Although readers are often amused by Holmes's quirks, such as using the toe of a Persian slipper as a tobacco container, and they often take pleasure in trying to psychoanalyze the emotional life of this determinedly opaque genius, the basic appeal of a Holmes tale is intellectual. We follow along, admiring and envious at the same time, as Holmes solves the crime puzzle with a casual flair that seems irresistibly arrogant and aristocratic. The Holmes model also proved irresistible to Conan Doyle's rivals and successors, especially in Britain. There were many of them, particularly in the period right after World War I, which came to be known as the Golden Age of detective stories. Their appeal seemed to stretch everywhere. Even His Majesty's cabinet ministers were said to have detective novels on their bedside tables. The writers of these tales developed their own unique detective heroes, but most of them were amateur sleuths who let the police handle routine cases and the ordinary legwork in more complicated investigations. That is, when they didn't delegate such drudge work to faithful, sometimes hapless assistants. Often, as in the case of Dorothy Sayers' Lord Peter Wimsey, they were quite literally members of the aristocracy. Perhaps the most famous and the most prolific mystery writer to emerge in the period between the two world wars was Agatha Christie. Her diminutive Belgian genius, Hercule Poirot, with his formidable mustache and compulsive neatness, is as much a caricature as a character. But at least he doesn't get in the way of her deftly spun plots. Christie also created a sleuth who would seem to be the polar opposite of Poirot, the quietly brilliant and keenly observant elderly spinster, Miss Jane Marple. She wasn't the first woman detective in literary history, but her success reminded everyone that detection was a calling open to both sexes. Across the Atlantic, in the 20s, prohibition of alcoholic beverages and those who circumvented that law created a flamboyantly lawless atmosphere in the United States. This atmosphere produced interest in a new kind of crime fiction. The new breed of American detectives were hard-boiled private eyes, not amateurs in the British tradition. They were slightly seedy professionals who operated independent agencies and worked on the fringes of an urban underworld in which gangsters, crooked politicians, femme fatales, and even con artists prowled and schemed. First appearing in popular pulp magazines like Black Mask, the private eyes, with their tough, colorful style, soon attracted thousands of avid fans. They also attracted, in addition to a slew of pedestrian but money-making authors, a pair of authentic literary artists of the first rank, men who could take the hard-boiled form to a mythic level, Dashiell Hammett and Raymond Chandler. We'll explore Hammett's career in some detail in our next talk, but we should take this opportunity to say a bit more about Chandler. He was born in Illinois in 1888, but raised mostly in England, after his English mother divorced his American father. After serving in World War I, he returned to the United States, settled in California, and became an executive in the oil business. When a drinking problem and the Depression shut down that career, he became a 45-year-old novice writer, beginning with stories published in Black Mask, like Hammett before him. His great detective, Philip Marlowe, can tell his own stories in clipped, ironic, metaphor-studded prose, and seems like a stylishly cynical but still romantically developed knight-errant. Despite his tough talk and wised-up demeanor, Marlowe is a man who develops loyalties and feels obligations. He charts his own course, but he has strong emotions just below the cool surface. In short, he and Sam Spade, Hammett's sleuth, demonstrate that, at their best, hard-boiled detective stories don't appeal to us just as intellectual puzzles. They give us fascinating characters who grab our attention and build our admiration, as we shall see in our next talk when we focus in on Dashiell Hammett and how he created the Maltese Falcon. Until then, let me follow our tradition in these talks by signing off with thanks for the pleasure of your company.